Welcome to This Week in Self-Hosted for October 11th, 2024. Coming up in today's show, WordPress Drama, Mastodon updates, 13 new software updates, Plex reviews, a habit tracking app, and more in This Week in Self-Hosted. I'm your host, Ethan.
I'm Alex.
And I'm Steven.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to the inaugural episode of This Week in Self-Hosted. If you'd like to get to know us a little more, we have pre-recorded an introductory episode where we talk a little bit more about our backgrounds and our experiences that we'll include in the show notes for today's show. In the meantime, we have a lot of content to get through, so we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. So we're going to be following the newsletter and hit the major sections as we go down. We'll kick off with news. I don't know about anyone else, but I am not a WordPress user, but for some reason I have been eating up the WordPress drama that's been happening the last 2 weeks. I'm happy to give maybe like a 20-second recap of what's been going on, and I'd love to get some thoughts from the two of you, if you have any.
Let's hear it.
Yeah, so WordPress is kind of confusing, or at one point in my life was very confusing to me because you have WordPress.org and WordPress.com. But essentially, WordPress is an open source content management system. WordPress.com hosts WordPress sites. And then another third-party host, which is caught up in this drama, WP Engine, is also a WordPress host. And so they've been in the news the last several weeks because WordPress.com had called out WP Engine for profiting off of their use of WordPress without really being significant contributors to the code or the open source project. And so it's just been a whole fiasco. The WordPress.com CEO, which is actually owned by Automatic, who owns some other kind of relevant tech platforms, I think has put his foot in his mouth a couple times now, because it turned from they were upset with WP Engine for not contributing, and then they weren't respecting the license and then the trademark. And one of the more recent things that's happened is that Automatic, there's like 160 people resign. They took a severance package that was specifically offered by the CEO, who was pretty much like, hey, if you don't agree with what I'm doing here, you can leave. And so there's just been a whole lot of chaos. Now it's hard to figure out, where does WP Engine stand? Can they contribute to the broader WordPress organization? Do they still have access to plugins and things? It's a little crazy.
How big is Automatic to lose 160 people? That's probably the most surprising thing to me out of what you just said.
Yeah, I guess I should pull up my calculator to do the math. I read in the article that it's 8% of their total staff. So it's not insignificant.
They're much bigger than I thought they were.
Same. So this is a news article that I would say is self-hosted adjacent. WordPress is obviously a huge open source platform, and it's important to the self-hosting community, but also, and we see this a lot with other companies that are starting to adopt these fair use licenses, is how can companies leverage open source projects while still respecting their integrity and what they're intended to be. And so this has just been an interesting case study, and I think it will be at the end of the day as to maybe some of the dynamics and how people have gone about trying to make sure people are adhering to licenses, but at the same time also respecting other people's rights to use those licenses.
Now, another drama that I've been following pretty closely but don't have the skinny on is the Internet Archive. They've been in the news a lot this week.
Yeah, they've had a rough past couple months, actually. I think just a month or two ago, they lost their copyright battle because of some of the content they had been hosting. And now recently, I think the article you're referencing, I noticed, or I found for the first time on Have I Been Pwned? Have you ever used that website?
Yeah.
Yeah, all the time. And even password managers these days integrate with Have I Been Pwned?
Yeah. So for the first time, I saw my email address pop up on there this week because of their recent issue with their security breach.
Oh, that's unfortunate. So the Internet Archive during COVID started lending out books to people. And this was much to the publisher's chagrin at the time. So they took them to court. They took the Internet Archive to court. And unfortunately, I think they gained some new followers, shall we say, during that period. They sort of raised their profile, and a bunch of trolls, I suppose, came out, and now the Internet Archive's under attack, and this breach has released the info of 31 million people.
What is that? Is that the Streisand effect that I'm thinking of, where the negative attention of something actually brings more attention than the people who were attacking it had planned on? So
Yes.
many people weren't aware that you could do something like this on Internet Archive, but because of the lawsuit, a ton of people were made aware of this and maybe started taking advantage of it while it was still possible. I think that's a Streisand effect.
Google are experts in that, by the way. When they took down a Linus Tech Tips video a few weeks ago, because he mentioned circumventing some YouTube stuff with an app from Lewis Rossman. And suddenly, apparently, that app has a lot more installs now. So, go figure.
If anyone's
Exactly.
actually interested more in that Internet Archive situation, I think you actually should look into it. It's quite interesting with the history based around publishers and not wanting people to lend out books or resell books. Even at one point, that was apparently illegal to do, to resell a book. But it's quite a lot of history there. It's a neat read.
Yeah, so lawsuits overall seem to be the key theme of the news section this week. The last thing I included in the newsletter was an interesting article on Cloudflare. And admittedly, almost like licensing, I feel like I'm not up to speed enough to speak intelligently to the actual issues. But I did want to call out Cloudflare. I think gets a lot of flack from self-hosters because of, founded or unfounded privacy implications. But they do a lot of good work fighting patent trolls, especially surrounding open source software. So this particular instance in this week's newsletter, they had fought a patent troll that a couple other tech companies had also been taken to court and settled with out of court. They didn't bother trying to fight it. Cloudflare did. And so ultimately net positive for the technology community. The link to the article is in the newsletter if you want to read the specifics, but I think it's just a cool call out for those who normally give Cloudflare some flack.
Lots of folks don't like Cloudflare for the centralization reasons, I suspect. But so far, they've not really given us any reason to genuinely give them the flack that they get. I'm sure something will happen at some point that means it's a legitimate amount of flack. But for right now, at least, it's fine. So yay, Cloudflare, for fighting the good fight here and beating this patent troll into submission. Now, software updates. We're going to move on to the next section here. As always is the case in the weekly newsletter, there are dozens and dozens of software updates for your various self-hosted applications. I'm going to pick a few from the list this week. And we went to the garden centre at the weekend and bought some plants. So plant management is top of my mind. So Hausfox over here. Are either of you green-fingered gentlemen?
I'd like to be, but I'm not.
I can't be bothered to walk around my house on the regular and water these things.
You have a 3-year-old. They love walking around with watering cans.
I am not giving my 3-year-old a watering can to walk around and literally have water everywhere on the floor for my socks to find.
That's part of the fun, because then they get to mop it up too.
Truly.
So Hausfox is a self-hosted collaborative plant management system. This is analogous to an application on iOS that I've actually been using for a little while called Planta, Planta. It's essentially, you can put in your plants and create a to-do list of the last time you watered it, the last time you repotted it, all that kind of stuff. And you can look at weather, features, and a bunch of other stuff too. I just think it's a neat application. And they've added recently this week proxy authentication, location-specific logs, as well as email styling with additional API endpoints. Looks like the app's pretty easily deployable as a Docker container, so if you are a horticulturalist, then this might be a good app for you.
Yeah, I personally do have Hausfox spun up myself, even though I don't think I have a green finger necessarily. My wife and I bought a house almost 2 years ago now, and I remember at some point in our lives, we were those people who Do you know when you buy the plants, they come with the tags that have the name and information? We would just hoard those and like stick them in a drawer somewhere and just hope we don't actually need to refer to them now. Hausfox is great because you can actually scan those in, you can keep track of them, and you can also take the pictures of your plants and then assign them to their names and tags, which is very helpful for me because I never remember plant names. So it's been beneficial in that regard.
And also, they grow so slowly. Sometimes it's nice to have proof that they have actually grown, hey?
True.
Another one I wanted to pick out here was Komodo. This looks like it's going to be, if you're familiar with Fly.io, which is like an app hosting platform, Komodo have added container support along with OIDC and some UX improvements, that kind of thing. But Komodo was a new project to me when researching this week's episode. And it says it's a tool to build and deploy software on many servers. So this is a pretty interesting platform, actually. If you look at it, it's basically trying to be, like I say, a Fly.io kind of clone, but local and self-hosted. And I love that they've just added container support.
Yeah, so I saw one of the updates this week was support for OpenID Connect. People love their single sign-on, don't they?
Yeah, of course they do. I mean, we've got enough usernames and passwords and passkeys and all that nonsense to last us a lifetime, I think.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm there yet. I think my Vault Warden instance takes care of all that for me. So I'm often, I guess I shouldn't be surprised anymore how often people are clamoring for single sign-on support and all the self-hosted apps. I assume it's helpful when developers don't have to worry about managing authentication, but I could just assume.
It is because you can manage, as an administrator at least, you can manage everything as a central entity as opposed to having to go around 20, 30, 40 different apps and make changes. I think that's really the reason why. It's like this school admin with Active Directory or something.
Fair.
It also allows for higher security, right? So if you have a central management of identity, you don't have to worry as much about your smaller apps getting hacked.
That's right. Now, the last pick in the software update section is DockMost. This is essentially, I think, a bit of a Notion clone. So they have added space deletion, space slug, so the URL that you have for each of your spaces, customization, and you can now switch spaces from the sidebar. So some of these updates are like, it didn't do that already. But essentially, DockMost, it's a really interesting looking project. Just look at this screenshot here. You can see on the left, I mean, I don't know if either of you use Notion at all, but I have to for work. And this looks an awful lot like Notion, but it's completely self-hosted and you own the data.
Absolutely. And I know you say the space switching probably should have been there by default. I deploy Outline Wiki, if you're familiar with that. And as long as that's been around, they don't offer that in the self-hosted version. So when I saw that this week, I was immediately like, this is probably one of my weekend projects to spin this up and see how it compares, because I would love the ability to switch spaces, and I don't currently have that with Outline.
I'm just thinking for this show, even like we could have a space for our show docs, and then we've got all of the history of each episode, boom, 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 alongside. That would be pretty nice, huh?
It supports different users, I assume.
I presume so. I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, no, we
Watch
should
this
definitely spin
space.
that up. It would be really helpful. I was even thinking about using this for my business. This is pretty fantastic. I need to keep a lot of documentation about customers, so maybe I'll try that one out.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the purpose of this show, really, is just to try and add a little color to this list of links. You know, I've certainly been guilty in the past of looking at this wall of text and being like, okay, but there's so much there. I'm never going to look at the details or all of it. So each week we'll pick out 2 or 3 different items from each section. Now, the last thing that I need to talk to you guys about this morning are the breaking changes. Where are those? There we go. Breaking changes. So we have some stuff that you need to be aware of with Image Kiosk, first of all. So if you're not familiar with the Image Kiosk project, this is a front end for running lightweight slideshows on kiosk style devices like tablets, TVs, that kind of thing, web browsers. And it plugs straight into Image, which is really nice. So if you've got an Android TV and it shows you your Google Photos, this is a self-hosted equivalent of that, but pretty much on any device. The breaking change there with Image Kiosk this week is that it now, as of version 0.11, requires image 1.117 or higher, the latest version of Image as we record. The next breaking change is Mastodon. So they just released version 4.3 this week, and I actually saw a fair few folks running into just some niggling little issues as part of this upgrade. So if you are a Mastodon admin, just bear that in mind, that it might not be the smoothest upgrade ever, and you might want to have some snapshots or something ready before you go. They've added some new environment variables and also updated the minimum dependencies of the project as well. So just something to be aware of on the Mastodon side.
I know the two of you are Fediverse users, so I feel like you appreciate this. It's always easy for me to track Mastodon updates because essentially I know when they've released a major or somewhat significant upgrade, because for like a 24 or 48 hour time period, I'll get nothing but spam in my notifications. Not sure if you ran into that this week. I got excited. I was like, oh, did someone big share something I had done or created? And no, it was just spam from whatever vulnerabilities came with the latest update that needed to be patched in order for people to move on.
Well, that's fun. Now, I noticed that in the software launches section, Stephen, that there are some apps we're going to look at this morning. Defaulter looks like it's the first one in the doc.
That is the first one. And so, first off, these apps that I bring to you are ones that I hope, people will actually find some interest in. There's a ton on there that get listed every single week that I don't necessarily connect with, but there's tons of people out there that want all different sorts of things. So I bring you the ones I think this week that will appeal to the most. So yes, Defaulter is the first one, and it was the first one I chose because I think a lot of people run Plex. And so what this does is it automatically sets a default audio stream per user across your whole library. So this can be done as a scheduled task, or it can be done as a webhook through Tatuli, which I probably said wrong, but everyone says it different. And there's a complete Docker Compose that's provided on there, which I think would make it quite a bit easier to get up and running with this. I would love to know down in the comments if people actually see a good reason to do this. I don't see a good reason, but I'm sure because someone actually made this app, there is a good reason. So I'd love to hear about that.
I reckon one of the primary reasons for transcoding is downmixing 7.1 or high bitrate codecs to stereo or something like that. Maybe there is a use case there to try and prevent some transcoding, perhaps. Also, perhaps you have a relative that is in a foreign country and always wants to pick the German track, for example. Maybe that could be another one, and you don't want to have to walk them through over the phone. Here's how you change the audio track, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Yeah. All right. Well,
I do something similar. Oh, sorry. I do something similar with video, actually. Tatuli has a set of well-known scripts that can be used alongside of it. And so to keep, if you're familiar with the Plex apps, they always force lower quality streaming, especially when you're not on Wi-Fi, than realistically is required. And so there are scripts out there where you can essentially force your users to make sure they're using the original quality or somewhat close to lessen the impact of transcoding on your machine. I guess it was only a matter of time until something like that came out for audio as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's the only thing that I normally see these days being transcoded online. It's just the audio. So yeah, maybe these guys are onto something. Well, I think that brings us on to the next one. And that in the list is App Linker. There's no E, but just an R. So what this does, if you're a developer of mobile apps, obviously the Android flavor or the Apple flavor, it generates a QR code, and you can share that out to your potential users, or maybe you put this on an ad or something to that effect. So you self-host this app, and the QR code reaches out to your instance, and it pushes the user to their particular app store. So, if you're running an iPhone, it puts you over to the iOS store. What the handy thing for a dev would be on this is that it actually records statistics. So do you have more Android users? Do you have more iOS users? But maybe that's helpful to you to choose how much of your time goes into which app. It's self-hosted. It looks like a pretty neat thing.
I'm all about the AI audio transcriptions for every single one of my YouTube videos. I run it through Mac Whisper to get a proper transcription track. But you found a new one here called Scriber.
I sure did. So, obviously, as you said, AI audio transcription. It uses the open source Whisper models that OpenAI provides. It transcodes all of the audio locally on your hardware. So what that might mean is that you probably want like an NVIDIA GPU or something pushing this, or it's going to be pretty slow. But if you have that, you should give this a try. It allows you to summarize the transcripts, and that can use ChatGPT's API. Or you could also do this with Olama, which I found kind of interesting. They provide a straightforward Docker compose again, so that's pretty nice. And as you see on your screen right now, there's a fairly nice walkthrough demo.
Yeah, the demo in the README it looks like it's 6 minutes of watching a transcribing job bar fill up. There we go.
There it is. Yeah, it does. And I think the dev actually mentions that he ran this on a MacBook or some sort of M processor.
Right.
So they mention if you have the NVIDIA GPU, this is probably going to be quite a bit quicker.
I find, honestly, the performance on the MacBooks with the neural engine to be pretty much okay. It's I think the one thing that I'm really looking for out of these apps that they don't yet do is what's called diarization, where, you know, the three of us, for example, I would love to publish a transcript that it says, Alex said this, Ethan said that, Stephen said this. Now, you can do that, but you have to provide the Whisper engine 3 separate audio tracks. A lot of the time, like if you're transcribing another person's YouTube video or something for learning purposes, you don't have access to that level of detail, and it doesn't. In fairness, we as humans can differentiate different people's voices very easily, and I understand that it's a very deep technical challenge to try and diarize other people's voices, but that's really where I want to see these things go.
Another interesting use case for this, something popped up similar to this a couple of months ago. People are using similar technology to transcribe like podcasts and stuff and identify where the advertisement placements are so they can then cut them out, which isn't good if you're a podcaster or a content creator, but for those who are, you know, tired of being inundated with ads, I just found an interesting use case that I probably wouldn't have thought of on my own.
Yeah, ComSkip, but with transcriptions.
Yeah, exactly.
Now we get to talk about Nix, don't we?
Yes, we do get to talk about
Nix.
Alex's
yes, we can.
Topic.
Yeah. Actually, this meant that it was going to be kind of my favorite one to talk about, so I put it in there last. So, if you're trying to get into Nix and you've come across the fact that you have to write all these configs and whatnot, and you think, well, I have a home server that runs all of my Docker apps. I'd really love that to be Nix. You probably came across the fact that you really don't run Docker on Nix. You can, but it kind of doesn't really make sense. So what this application, Compose to Nix, aims to do is to take your Docker Compose file and then automatically generate a NixOS config from each one of the services. So right now it supports Docker and Podman, but each service is mapped into a systemd service. And then that obviously gets managed by NixOS itself. This fellow seems to have gone through a lot of effort here. This looks pretty developed. I haven't tried it out, but I might because I actually do want to get into Nix. There's a lot of documentation here. He runs through literally everything. And then handy, I found at the bottom, he kind of does a this command equals this command option. And it's probably a bit further up when we're going through there. It doesn't much matter. But any of your Docker Compose commands that you're used to just running to update and whatnot, he gives the new version of it. So, Alex, is this something that you think you might try?
Oh, Stephen. So the thing about Nix is that it's a fully declarative based operating system. So you can define, I'm just going to jump to another website over here, perfectmediaserver.com. You can define your entire operating system as a single configuration file. So, for example, over here, I have an example of what a configuration file for a media server might look like, with merger FS and all the rest of it in there, along with static IPs and Docker and stuff. When it comes to defining the actual applications themselves, I've been, as hopefully you all know, I've been a Docker user now for a decade plus. And I run all of my container stuff through an Ansible playbook. What I find interesting about this, so I run it all through Ansible so I can have it all in Git and declaratively manage it. What I find interesting about this Compose to Nix project is it's taking a lot of those same principles and Nixifying them, but also at the same time, like it's two worlds colliding that, I don't know, it's one of those things you probably have to try it. With Nix in general, I find that there's often not quite enough pressure relief valves to make things easy. Sometimes you do just want to spin something up real quick or whatever, and not have to rebuild the entire derivation set for your operating system. So I don't know. A jury will be out. I'll take a look at this over the coming weeks and report back at some point. But it's one of those things that I'm glad it exists. I don't know whether it needs to exist, but I'm glad that it does.
If you needed further proof of Alex's love for NixOS, I loved the "Take the Blue Pill" headline on the other web page you had.
Oh yeah, it literally says there's a lot to like about Nix, but if you aren't careful, you will drown in the complexity on offer. I think that's about as accurate a description as Nix as I could possibly come up with.
That's a true story.
Yeah. So it's community content time, and Plex have been busy this week, introducing yet more features nobody asked for. They've introduced the reviews section. So now you can share your ratings and reviews with your friends of friends on Plex. Who asked for this?
The best use case I can think of is asking my 4-year-old for her reviews of her movies and TV shows so I can share them publicly, because it would be magic.
Paw Patrol, anyone? Bluey?
Bluey, yes.
Yeah. I think I like Bluey more than my kid does, to be honest.
Don't we all?
Literally, the license plate on my car is Bandit, because I've got a blue car, and I just thought Bandit was just... Anyway.
He's such a good role model.
He genuinely, if you could be a Bandit parent, then I think you're doing some stuff okay in life. So what I find interesting, let's jump back to Plex for a second instead of talking about Bluey. What I find interesting about this in particular is that they are very clear up front and say that your existing privacy settings will be preserved, and you can decide on a privacy level that makes you feel the most comfortable. They know their audience. They know their audience are going to be like, well, that, if I'm sharing reviews means, I'm going to be exposing some of my collection to the internet. Surely, if you have to preface everything you're about to say in your announcement post or something like that, just why? Like, I don't understand. Like, IMDb exists. Who is this for?
They talk a little bit about, at the bottom of the page that we have here, that they'll eventually be public reviews that you can sign up for an early access beta for it, I guess, for anyone interested. I'm just wondering if this is going to turn into a Goodreads type situation where there's just this entire industry on Goodreads around people reviewing books and being sponsored for it, and there's a lot of monetization there. And I wonder if that's where they're trying to go, especially as they pick up new platforms, streaming support for everything.
Maybe, yeah. Follow the money, huh? That's always the answer to these sorts of things.
Yep.
Next up, my old friends at linuxserver.io have written, I think, one of the most comprehensive articles on Docker networking that I have seen in many a year. Spad, who is one of the core linuxserver.io team, has written, honestly, it's a bit of a monster post talking about some of the intricacies of Docker networking and bridge mode versus host mode, all that kind of stuff. So if it's been one of those topics you've been thinking, I should probably move away from just using the default network, take a read of this article. Highly recommend it. You will learn something.
And then moving on, the next section is the content spotlight. On a weekly basis, I typically just find one usually software, but it could be a content creator, it could be a couple different projects. I found one this week that I thought was particularly helpful. And probably for most of you who are, New Year's resolutioners who maybe might have trouble sticking with it, but also like pretty graphs and might be able to use them as motivation. The platform is called Beaver Habit Tracker. It was actually in the software launch section last week. It's fairly new. It's a really nice platform for tracking habits. I know that's something I see brought up a lot. People are looking for good platforms. It has a nice mobile web app, not app, but a mobile interface for using on the browser on your phone that makes it super helpful. And then Alex, if you don't mind scrolling just a little bit, the bottom of the screenshot has like a really nice GitHub-like streak chart that you can have for last 3 months or a year. So again, when I talk about pretty charts, that's what I was referencing. And admittedly, I'm kind of tempted to spin this up myself. And it's probably something I'm going to work on this weekend just so I can see that. Although I don't necessarily currently have any resolutions that I'm still trying to follow at this point in time. But New Year's is coming up.
Yeah, somehow it's mid-October already.
Hard to believe.
Yeah. I can't believe where 2024 is going, to be honest. But this app, it's pretty interesting. That I just love the richness of the self-hosted app ecosystem that we have these days. This one, yeah, it's pretty cool. Right, time to plug the survey that I definitely have taken.
So if you are like Alex and you haven't done the survey, that is closing today at 9 p.m. Eastern. Maybe you should go over to the self-host website and to maybe take this survey. It's actually pretty helpful. It helps us guide perhaps some things on the weekly newsletter. And it's actually just really neat to share the info that comes out of it.
Yeah, about 10, 15 minutes it should take you. It's a completely anonymous survey, just asking you some questions about your self-hosted environment, what you're running in it, why, maybe some demographic information. That bit, of course, is completely optional. I want to underscore that this is totally anonymous. But I want to ask Ethan, given we have him on camera right here, what do we end up using this data for?
Yeah, so my primary purpose, two purposes. One, I think it's really interesting and insightful to just share with the community so other people can use it for their own discovery. Hey, what platforms, what technologies are other people using? So in the next week or two after it closes tonight, I will work on visualizing that, and I'll just post it on a blog post on my site, and anyone can view it and look at it and do what they want with it. And then I also analyze it myself to understand trends and where my own readers are for the newsletter on my website, just so I know how to cater that information and the things that I'm featuring to be more aligned with what people are actually interested in. I have had some academic institutions reach out in the past for the raw data, which I provide. Again, it's completely anonymized, so I'm not worried about compromising anyone's privacy or anything. But I've actually never heard back from anyone on what it's been used for. So if it happens again, I promise I will follow up and report back here.
Let us know if you are one of those institutions and you happen to be watching this episode, because we want to know. So I think that brings us to the end of episode 1 for this week. Thank you very much for watching. And just a quick reminder, we have an origin story, sort of episode 0, like meet the hosts type deal in the feed as well. So if you want to know a little bit more about myself, Ethan and Stephen, go ahead and check that out. The self-hosted user survey closes today at 9 p.m. Just another reminder. Now, if people want to find you throughout the week, Ethan, obviously they can go to self-host, but where else can they find you?
Yeah, so I have a landing page, ethanshawley.com, has a link to all of my socials, any other projects I work on. That's probably where they could find the most about me.
Stephen?
I'm working on a landing page, but for right now, you can just find me, Stephen, at lostpackets.ca.
That's such a fantastic domain name. Great job with that one.
Do you want an email on there?
I actually bought tethics.lol the other day. If you're into Silicon Valley, hopefully you'll find that as funny as I do. You can find, though, I have a self-hosted link tree over at alex.ktz.me. Of course, the self-hosted podcast, self-hosted.show, perfectmediaserver.com, Tailscale YouTube. I'm all over the place. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, this has been This Week in Self-Hosted.